And Madam Chair, I thought of a question for Senator Brock while we were on break.
You're now live.
If I may.
Great. Did you have a question? Do you want to do it now or?
Sure. Yeah, just in case we're still sort of on the contract provisions and all that kind of stuff. Senator Brock, since you're a former state auditor, I was thinking about, I'm sure everyone in this committee is more hopeful than the average person that all these entities that we're talking about funding succeed. And it may be that at some point they get audited as part of seeing how they're operating, et cetera. And I'm just wondering if you've been thinking about in what ways we would put an auditor's mindset on these contracts or what we're constructing now in this bill to make it as open and accessible and to an auditor who needed to do a performance audit downstream, so that you wouldn't run into we don't aggregate data that way, or it's proprietary or something, I don't know if you've thought about it at all.
Yeah. Actually, I have been thinking about it. And in fact, over the past several days, I've been in communication back and forth with Doug Hoffer about this and about a number of other contracts that we're doing in connection with COVID relief generally, or the accident, the federal accident we're dealing with, and talking about what kinds of things we should put in to contracts immediately. There should certainly in this contract be something about internal controls and record keeping and the like, and we can come up with some language, I think, very easily to do that. But also what I've been thinking about, and in fact, more generally, and still have to have further discussion with the auditor, we have a tendency to come back and audit things a year after the disaster has occurred. And that basically, it's akin to coming onto the battlefield after the battlefield is over, the battle is over, and then bayoneting the wounded. There are better ways to approach it than that. And one of them is, I'm asking him to think about the concept of pre-implementation reviews. And that is having an audit team come in periodically as something particularly new is being developed to look for whether or not there are holes in internal controls and monitoring that you can see before the disaster happens to help prevent it. That's a discussion that's just beginning, and so it's not ready for prime time. But I think we can put some good control language in this bill, yes.
Yeah.
It's an excellent question.
Okay, well, great. I mean, I would prefer that these be wellness checkups more than battlefield deaths, Thanks.
Okay. So committee, we're back to the one big discussion, which is governance. And then we'll start wordsmithing and fine tuning. Maria, you said you could shed some light or give a legal opinion on our ability. Are you ready to do that now or?
Sure.
Okay.
I can do that. Pretty quickly, I think summarize what the issues are. So I agree. I agree up to a point with some of the things that Christine Hallquist said. The one distinction that I might make is, he was, and I think some of you pointed this out, he was talking about how CUDs can contract with various providers and require net neutrality, and but that somehow that was different than what the state could do when it contracts or gives grants directly to private providers. So I guess I maybe disagree a little bit. I think that the state actually, with respect to public funds, enjoys considerable discretion in deciding what projects or even private entities it wants to subsidize with public dollars and can condition it as it sees best. What is very important, though, to mention, and this falls under kind of a doctrine known as the market participant doctrine, when the state is acting in a proprietary capacity with respect to the expenditure of its own funds, right? As opposed to a regulator acting in a regulatory capacity. And And that's an important distinction. And in fact, that market participant doctrine was essentially the foundation of what you did in 2018 with respect to state contracts for internet service. And you went through the same legal analysis and felt that you did have the authority as the purchaser of internet service to decide what you want that service to be, which is very consistent with what the FCC said should happen, that consumers should know what they're buying. There should be transparency about network practices, and then they should be able to decide what they want to purchase. So Vermont said, well, we want to purchase internet service from providers who agree to comply with net neutrality rules. And I think there's a strong case for that. However, as you know, that did not prevent various trade associations from suing the state and arguing that even this kind of narrow assertion of state authority violated federal preemption, did an end run around, the federal prohibition on state regulation. And, I think the state does have a strong argument, but right now it's in litigation. And what a court is going to do is look at the impact of Vermont state law, how it affects the market, how it affects consumers, what are the public policies at stake? Does it contravene the federal policies of non-regulation? There's a lot of analysis that goes there. And the only reason why I'm mentioning that is because what you're proposing to do here, I think is very similar to what you've already done. And I think the legal arguments are very similar. And I think you do have a strong case. I just feel it's important to mention that, you may be subject to a lawsuit if you require it, but I have zero control or knowledge over that issue. But that's kind of the nutshell as I see it.
Okay, so it'll depend on who's there. If we do a private telephone company, family owned, and they apply for a grant, we say you can apply as long as you abide by the same rules that the CUD or all other grant recipients abide by. And they agree, that's fine. Yeah, we might get sued, but we're probably such small fish at this point. But
well, I don't know, because you did get sued already on Vermont,
yeah.
So I can't speak to that at all. But I think you're right. And when you think about it, under your existing grant program, right, the connectivity initiative, you give out grants, but you regulate what you're willing to pay for, in the sense that you have speed requirements. You're already designing the conditions on the broadband service you're willing to fund. I think the net neutrality is, just another condition that you could impose. But depending on the ramifications, depending on, what's argued, it's obviously a very contentious issue. So
it's how much risk we want to take. What Christine, I might move back. All right, I'll move up. I think what Christine said is, okay, they sign the contract. They say, yep, we'll do it. And then they don't do it. Or I'm not sure that we're not going to, that a local telephone provider in Vermont is going to violate the terms of the contract. These aren't big national companies. But if for some reason they decided, nope, we've got to charge, local access TV or somebody else a different rate than somebody else, or we're going to prioritize who has access, or speed, we couldn't enforce the contract.
Well, I think you could. I mean, they have to agree to whatever conditions you establish in the contract, whether it's with a CUD or whether it's with the state. And I think, as some of you mentioned already, it's voluntary. Participation is voluntary. So if they're willing to abide by your conditions, that's their choice. You're not mandating that they accept any public dollars, so I think that's.
Okay. And we're not mandating that they provide fiber access to everybody's house. I mean, if they take the contract, we are, but we aren't mandating in
Right.
general that.
That's correct. That's correct. In general, their carrier of last resort requirements only apply to their telephone service. They have no other obligations for building out broadband in their service territories.
Okay, committee. I see, Brandy, you had a question.
As you think about what can be mandated, let's say to a Waitsfield telephone, is there not a difference between mandating open access and mandating net neutrality? And this is particularly true if you talk about a carrier such as one of the legacy carriers that might have even broader reach. I would think that you could mandate, for example, open access for that part of the network that you funded the construction of. But extending it beyond that, would that not be a problem?
I think that would be a problem if you extended it beyond that. And I think that's where you probably have providers saying that that's more of it has a regulatory effect, kind of downstream regulatory effect. It's networks that they've privately funded, and it's the state trying to exert influence, beyond state funded infrastructure. So I think they could legitimately come back and say, this is too far of a reach. But for the networks that they build with public dollars, I think then it's a policy choice. Then it becomes, as you've already been looking at, what are the economics? If we require open access, does that discourage a provider from building it if they're going to have to compete? If the CUD owns it and can lease to any provider, will that promote competition and they'll participate? Those are all, I think you've been addressing those issues, and I think those are policy choices.
And that said, then I would think that you would be able to construct language that would narrowly focus the requirement to that portion of a provider's network or other activities that are funded with state dollars.
I think, yes, I would absolutely try to do that. If they then, I guess, as I'm thinking this through and try and anticipate some of the pushback that you might get, as you know, these networks are all interconnected. And in terms of the service that might flow over, various networks, portions of which are publicly funded, portions of which are not. So that kind of gets to the impossibility issue of trying to distinguish. Usually you look at, can you distinguish between interstate and intrastate in the realm of broadband service? It's right. But now it's looking at, can you distinguish between broadband service that's just on a publicly funded network as opposed to also flows over a privately funded network? But again, that may get to that. You may want to hear more from providers, because even with that requirement, they might be willing to accept the state dollars. That I don't know what their network management or performance plans are. So.
Okay. So would it be safer to go back to where we were yesterday, which is say, abide by net neutrality as far as is legally possible, given that the legal possibilities seem to be in flux.
You can certainly do that. And as a lot of people have pointed out, there's a lot that might change in the next 6 months, just in terms of what happens at the FCC, who was appointed the chair. Once there's a Democratic majority, might they go back to net neutrality requirements? So during this interim, there's a lot that potentially could change that, might even, rather than waiting for the Vermont litigation to continue, you might get answers. You might get legal authority sooner than you anticipate, or Congress may address this issue. Hard to predict, but it is certainly safer to say you'll be consistent with as legally permitted. You do leave open the possibility that there might be some more definitive authority given to the state.
Okay.
How does that, excuse me, Madam Chair,
Yes.
how does that help the law at all? I mean, I think it's very strange to start putting in laws that, to the extent it's legally permissible, it sort of sends a signal that we're unsure of what we're doing here. We certainly didn't do it in the procurement bill in 2018. We rarely ever do that. If we're going to get sued, we're going to get sued.
Yep.
I don't know what putting in prefatory language saying that to the extent we can do this bill will go forward.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking of it. Well, you're right. I guess I was thinking of it in terms of, if there is federal action, whether it's regulatory or whether it's congressional action that, resolves the issue so that there's no dispute about what the state's authority is.
Well, maybe you can draft it in a way that works. I'd like to see that, but I think
Sure.
what that does is it says until that happens, we're on questionable grounds. And I
Okay,
Yeah.
I've got Senator Bray.
So I'm wondering if, practically speaking, the way you end up expressing this is in some sort of severability clause, or if we're actually trying to lean the other way, non-severability. But is that how you would write it? That the contract, the grants are still valid. I mean, I don't know which way, but you could make a case either direction.
You could. I mean, under Vermont, there is a severability requirement. So if a portion of a law or a legal requirement is struck down, that doesn't negate the rest of the statute. If they can be separated, right? So that's read into every law. But maybe a reference that if you want to move forward. I mean, Senator Strachan's point is well taken. If you just want to make the requirement, I think you have strong legal support for that. I was just saying, based on the history, you have been sued before. I don't know that you would be sued for this.
Okay.
And maybe the Attorney General's office has has some ideas about how this might move forward. Maybe if there were a lawsuit, or it would be consolidated with the existing lawsuit, and maybe you could deal with both issues in one trial. And maybe
we can just drop a note over to Josh Diamond and see what he's got for us, and do that. There is, even if we just say this is it and the House goes along, there is another party that may be more risk averse than we are.
Right.
Lawsuits are very expensive. So this bill really needs to go through, and I'd just soon it not get vetoed on a technicality, and we've seen those before. So Senator Pearson.
I would just point out that I'm not an attorney, but you have to have standing to bring a lawsuit. CUDs are more than willing to comply with net neutrality. We've heard this across the board from them. So I just don't think it seems to me that we could stick it in there and next year find out that the court's been resolved or the FCC change a ruling and tweak it long before anybody's going to, I mean, I guess I struggle with standing on a lawsuit from some entity that doesn't think we have the right, but they don't have a grant. So, you know what I mean? Anyway.
Yeah, no, I think where it
we
would
should
give us
move along.
issue is the private telecoms. It sounds like we're okay with the CUDs because they're a private municipality. They're not a governing or a regulating entity. And they're not regulating, they're doing what we're doing, but we're a regulating entity. The issue would come with the telecoms or anybody that wasn't a CUD. I think if we leave it in not requirements, but priorities, that we might, I know, would that give us some protection? You know, you can apply, but if you won't be net neutral, you get a B instead of an A on that, or you get scored at a 5 instead of a 10. However, they're going to rank these grants. Would that?
Yeah, I think you could do that. Then it's a priority, and the state is saying
Priority,
that's what
but
we
it's not a hard,
prioritize.
yeah,
Mhm,
it's not a hard requirement.
mhm.
Okay. So I think we know what our options are on that one. I think we need to go forward talking about, and I'm getting emails back and forth here. We're starting next week. We're going to start around 10 in the morning because morning chairs are being shut down. So that will give any of your morning committees a chance to do a real quick meeting. But I wanted to allow some space in there, or you might get an extra hour, but we're filled until 3:30 on Tuesday. And we may have to knock that all down because I'm not at all sure this is going to be done and drafted and wordsmithed.
Take us through authority, Madam Chair.
Pardon?
Take us through the authority. That's what you said you wanted.
Well,
to
that's what I wanted. We've got reenacting the telecom. We've got the House proposal for a broadband board. I've been doing some thinking. I listened to Matt Dunn say he thinks there's some capacity within one or more departments that might be a preferable option. I was thinking of where we did a board private partnership when we did Vital. And it didn't work very well. We sent in a strong man and things got straightened out. That unless we're going to just leave it all up to the CUDs to do their own business plans and their own working out, given we're hearing from the well-organized ones. The other ones right now don't have paid staff. They're in a different place. I've been thinking about how we might do, and this came out also from Vermont VTA. You need somebody and a volunteer board, and I don't think we're going to have enough money to pay a board. You need somebody that's accountable and that knows what they're doing. So I've been toying with the idea of, and I talked to the commissioner before I volunteered her department. I had thought about ACCD, but I think they'll have a fit because they're so tied up in business grants and, restoring the economy. I don't know that they'll want to do this one. She suggested we look at, is it the Water Resources Board that Senator Perchlik chairs, that is ostensibly under the authority of the department. Thus, there's a relationship, but that works very independently and has a director. And it's the
Clean
director
Energy
that's,
Development Fund, is that what you mean, Madam Chair?
yeah. No, is it the Community Development Fund?
Clean Energy Development.
Clean Energy Fund, yeah. So if we can you can take one person, tell them they're responsible, you give them a budget and tell them, this is what we want you to do very clearly. This is what we're going to hold you responsible for. Here's your budget. And I found out today there is 100 million in for this coming year in the budget, and they reserved 50 for next year. This I found out today. But that's the budget, or that's the totality of what we have. They've also covered the cost of E911 with ARPA funds for 2 years, because that's going to take more work, because the connectivity fund, because of changes in the market, it's a fee on landline or on telephones, but more going to, it's not growing at the rate it needs to keep up with the costs of the program. So that's going to need to be worked on over the next few years. They've covered the cost in the budget, and we can kick that can down the road a little bit. But I'm thinking, because we've got Rob, who has an ongoing relationship, but as the commissioner said, nobody's asked him if he wants to go work for somebody else. Might do that. They also have money for a finance person. They have some legal capacity in-house, but to set up what is basically an independent board, just to get these grants out. When we start marketing broadband again, we might want to kick that to ACCD. But that's just my thinking on a third alternative. But
Madam
the
Chair,
floor is wide open. I got Senator Hardy first, and then I'll get you.
It's okay. Go ahead, Chris.
well, you said that's my thinking, and I wouldn't have been able to tell you what you said. Could you summarize your thinking, if you wouldn't mind?
Okay, my thinking is that we might want to set up a broadband expansion fund, whatever we want to call it. We hire an executive director to manage that fund, and we give the director very specific requirements. And that can be, and we give him a budget, and we tell him to obtain the expertise that he needs, because I don't know if you can get a telecom lawyer, on contract, or I don't know. And I don't know at this point what skills we can get in the market right now for a director. I don't know what we'll have to pay to get a director with the skills we need for a short-term job. But I think that might be easier than getting an unpaid board or a modestly paid board and getting all the skills we need. I think we can give the director the ability to set up a working group, whatever that person needs, and we can decide where we house it. It's just a different model. So Senator Hardy.
Okay, Madam Chair, I think I'm understanding what you're saying, or I'm going to rephrase it maybe a little bit to that, that you're suggesting basically keeping it under the umbrella of the Public Service Department and giving them additional staff in order to make sure that the work happens, because a transition to a new entity will take time, and there's a question as to whether or not we'll be able to find board members with the expertise that we need. There is already and I think that's a really good possibility. I heard what Matt Dunn said too, and I think that, we have a department that's been working on this for a number of years and has somehow in-house expertise already. There also is an advisory council or advisory board or something that is already part of the Public Service Department that advises the commissioner on these issues, and they could be either revamped or given a little bit more authority or duties to do this as well. I think that's what you're saying as an option.
Yep,
Something like
that's
that. Okay.
Yeah, okay. And we also have been told very clearly that the governor does not want to establish this huge ongoing bureaucracy. So I'm kind of treading on, I'm trying to avoid as many touch points,
right,
for issue as I can.
How can we work with what we already have, basically, and make it better, but still not create a whole new world
and create some independence. If we have a director, we give him a budget, and the director has control over that budget, and we tell him very clearly what we want him to do or her. Then I think it just seems like it's a much more focused, and perhaps at this point, given how many projects we're likely to get out the door this year, more in proportion to what we're trying to do. It's really a scaling back what the House did, but just something to think about. Senator Brock.
How much confidence do we have in the Department of Public Service?
Well, two of you have no confidence.
I asked that question seriously because, the question becomes then, if you have this director, who does the director report to?
I think we can ask Senator Perchland. That's the model we're being asked to do. I think I know there's been issues with getting a plan. On the other hand, we've given the department no staff and no money, and neither has the governor. And I have a hard time holding people responsible when we don't give them the tools. I want to give this person the tools. I think they've done a decent job in the past year of getting the funds we had, the CARES funds, out the door, of following the instructions we asked for. In that way, when we put the resources there, I haven't heard any major complaints, but I may be wrong. They are what we have. We can create something new, but we're going to be gone. And when we come back, we'll find out if our confidence was misplaced. Senator Bray, you gave up on the yellow hand.
I'm back to my pink hand here. I guess the question is, we go back and forth on this and it can make arguments either way. One thing I'm just thinking about is, do we really consider this a fundamental obligation of government to help deliver this service? And to the degree that we do, then it should remain under our direction, whether it's in a department or outside a department, and that's, I think, part of, I don't want to see it float off and be so independent that then we lose control. Just sounds negative. We're also responsible for it. So if we're going to try to influence it and make sure that it does succeed, we'll need to have the right level of engagement. So we're not micromanaging, but we can influence the decision making. One example, one last quick thing. I think about when we started Farm to Plate, we ended up going outside of government to the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. And part of the instinct there was they were going to have a lot of skin in the game, because if that program succeeded, it would be great for them and everyone on whose behalf they were working. If it failed, it was going to be, I think, a real problem for them. So, I think that's part of me is still drawn to that whole thing of making sure that the people who take on the work have skin in the game.
We haven't, if we did that, we would be looking at folks who are involved with CUDs or broadband. But we haven't asked them if any of them see themselves as having enough time to be doing what's going to have to be some very intense work over the next 6 months.
Right.
To get this up and running. And we haven't talked about, are we going to pay them?
Right.
Well, as they say, you get what you pay for.
Right.
Yeah.
I also think you may have just answered the question. If we're doing this in 6 months, we may.
Well, if we're talking about, we want to have fiber up and running by the end of this year, or a plan for, it's step by step. I think we want, and we haven't totally defined that. We want to get the guys that are ready to string fiber, stringing it, and we want it out the door ASAP. We want to get the guys who have business plans and to, then flesh those out and be ready to come in for a grant for next year. And if there are any further behind than that, or any that are still unincorporated, I think we do still have a bunch of areas that aren't covered by CUDs. We're going to need to find either locals that'll do a CUD or some other alternative. We want to move everybody forward. And I think we want to be.
Well, can I ask
we need
one
to have
last
some
thing?
fiber going up to make this whole thing real.
So thank you, Senator Hardy. Sorry to keep jumping, but the thread keeps rolling. Given when you say, well, we're trying to do this in the next 6 months, it just makes me think the only practicable choice is going back to the department, because they already exist. They already have people working on this. Then I don't think we should be shy about making sure they have enough staff to get the job done at the same time.
Senator Hardy?
Thank you. I agree. I think that the most efficient and the expeditious, is that a word? Way to do it is to keep it under the department, given that we have this 3-year window that we have federal funding that we want to spend to build out broadband in unserved and underserved areas of our state. To answer Senator Brock's question about do we trust the department, I think we have seen them build, increase and build out these CUDs significantly over the last couple of years. They've done a fantastic job of creating CUDs throughout the state and helping support that work at the local level. We now have way more CUDs that cover most of the state, and they've supported them in their work and gotten them this far to the point where we're actually talking about giving them tens of millions of dollars to put broadband, to string, fiber and get broadband to Vermonters. So, and they have over the last year during the pandemic successfully gotten service to more people. I think that they are a totally viable option, and I think that they are certainly the fastest option. And they are a department of government. The commissioner reports to the governor directly, and then if we create a director position, I think that's a great idea, and make sure they have sufficient staff and a sufficient budget to be able to do this work, not chintz on that part of it. Give them staff, give them a budget, help them make sure this happens. The CUDs are going to be doing the work at the local level, and potentially the small telcos. They're actually going to be stringing the fiber. They're actually going to be doing the business plans and doing the tech plans, not the department. The department's going to be supporting that work, or the whatever it is going to be supporting that work. But the work that's actually bringing broadband to our constituents and the people of Vermont is happening at the local level. And I think however we can facilitate that and do it as fast as possible, that's what we should be doing.
Senator Pearson, was that a hand or a half hand?
A half hand, and I have a half idea. I really can argue both points, as Senator Bray said. The House bill, it's worth just grounding in that, contemplates the department handling it for this year and then shifting authority, right? So they deal with the urgency that way. I've been wondering, one of the things that the woman that was with Matt Dunn sort of
Joanne Purvis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things she said that spooked me was, the state has a lot of experience issuing grants, and do we need to replicate that? And it made me think about the idea that we've got, to my mind, two distinct sides of this. We've got some staff that I think we all agree in some place need to be basically centralized expertise for these CUDs, right? Whether it's engineering, contract, finance, expertise, probably those three things primarily. And I've wondered if we should consider putting those people under a director of broadband build out or something at the department, and then move the granting authority to somewhere else, or some different or combined phase of state government, facet of state government. Just because it's always bothered me that the people that are on the phone every day with the Christine Hallquists and the folks trying to help them beef up their business plan and figure out their contracting are then issuing grants and to the very people they've been helping. I don't know. I think it's sort of like asking a teacher to I don't know. So that's a half a hand, Madam Chair. Sorry.
No, I think that's part of the issue. I mean, part of it was, I looked at ACCD. They've been doing a lot of granting, but having dealt with them for a year with just the economic development grants or the business grants, I'm not sure they're going to be overly thrilled, but they do a lot of granting. I think some of us weren't overly happy with how they initially did the grants, but what we told them to do is get the CARES money out the door as fast as possible, and that's what they did. We told them to prioritize. They managed to do it. I think if our real job is to write the criteria and write, what the grants are going to be based on and judged on. We can put the executive director over there and leave the first 6 months to the department. There isn't a whole lot of expertise, if any, at ACCD. And again, I don't know if the folks at the department would want to move over to ACCD. I don't think we can just move them, but they're all possible. Senator Bray.
So there's so much specialized knowledge and regulatory apparatus around all this work that it seems like the department seems like the natural home for it. Maybe somebody with the skill set of whoever we imagine at ACCD could be helpful. I mean, I remember one of the basic services CUDs asked for was at some point communications and marketing, so that they would be successful in outreach and building their client list, building the customer list. But other than that, it doesn't seem like a very sort of consumer-oriented, kind of department. I can understand Senator Pearson's concern about I don't know if it's like regulatory capture or whatever it is. If you help prepare the student for the exam you're about to administer, your students are probably going to write the essay you wanted. So I don't know how that one works, but
well, if they write the essay you wanted, that's probably fine.
That's what teachers do all the time.
Yeah, but it's learning what they want, but it's who grades it.
Right.
And in school, it's the teacher, but how do you separate out that support? And I've worked with this person, I know how far they've come, and I really, want to help these guys. You need a much colder heart, I think, to sit down and rank grants. And that may be the separation of power we're looking for.
So can I ask about one other thing that leaves me a little worried about the department, just to be honest? We heard the build out in Danville issue. And I'm not sure that I'd like to understand that better. There are different parties that feel like it was that non-optimal choices were made in terms of who was funded to do what up there, and that we've created a bit of an obstacle for CUDs because the high density customers in one area were picked up, and then everyone around them was left out. So we've created that perfect mixture of high expense, few customers for the CUD to sort of mop up after, was the impression I got from some of our testimony. And I don't know, I would certainly want to make sure we didn't end up in a situation like that again. I don't know how that happened, but it did involve grant money. So.
Okay. I mean, I've heard, some random emails and some concerns, but I know no facts. And Danville isn't part of the Lamoille. No, they're doing Lamoille, not Caledonia. They're not part of Northeast. They're not one of Christine's folks. We've questioned to find out what happened. I'm sure Christine will tell us. Senator McDonald.
Madam Chair, I believe the articulated concern about the Danville project was that it sent money to people who cherry picked the profitable areas and didn't go to the underserved and the unserved. Now that may be correct or not, but I personally would be concerned that whoever was picked to administer the next year, regardless of who they reported to, that sort of project would be discouraged by the guidelines that we've been talking about. So
I think our discussion has been very clear. You know, I don't know what the contract is. I don't know if that was a CARES contract or a pre-existing contract.
it was one that we were asked to extend the deadline on it to make it eligible for CARES funds.
CARES, okay, yeah.
Yep.
There may be a contract where the agreement is first we're going to do downtown and get a payment base, and then we're going to go out, you know, out the wheels of the spoke out towards Peacham or wherever. I don't know that. If it was done and there is no further agreement and it created isolated pockets, I'd be very concerned if it's part of a larger plan, because I think you're going to find that the CUDs are going to need to do their more populous areas in order to get the base they need to go out that 9 miles to 2 households. I mean, Christine said that there's just a point at which it's not profitable to get there. It's not, they're going to lose too much money doing it. And it's very clear that if they had to put up poles to get there, it you know, that's just more than they can do. So that's up to us to decide about what is universal coverage. Does it mean only where there are utility poles? Or does it mean you got to put up poles to get that person who may or may not want your service 9 miles up the mountain?
Madam Chair, on that final point, I believe that we're in agreement that we want to send fiber where electricity goes, and that's our default point, and we're not trying to go beyond that. That falls into the category of things we'll worry about later after we get fiber to places that
tells
already
us
have
what
electricity.
Definitions we need to have.
But on the Danville thing, perhaps you've asked several questions that would be worth understanding. I would hope that if we put someone in charge of giving grants, they wouldn't give them to private companies to go into to cherry pick areas. That's all.
No, that's why we need someone who's accountable that we can fire if they do that.
Okay.
And we've got to figure out how we write that, because I also think this person's going to need to be a state employee if they're going to get health insurance and other essential benefits. So I've got Senator Bray and then Senator Pearson.
Yeah, so I had been corresponding some with Irv Tomei, or he's been listening to us and writing. He'll hear a question that he finds interesting, and I'll get an email on it. So on this question of building out, if I may, I'll just read very briefly, like a sentence or two. I had said something about, do we anticipate CUDs will go to the most profitable places first and eventually get out, or do we want to encourage them to go to the most underserved first, which may not be most profitable? And he said, it is true that after developing a comprehensive plan to deliver universal broadband access throughout its territory, a CUD will need to divide the entire project into stages or phases. It is also true that any sound business plan will recognize the need to start with one or more subunits that can reasonably be expected to achieve adequate customer revenue soonest, But that does not necessarily mean that smaller towns will remain unserved for longer periods of time. And EC Fiber's experience, the highest initial take rates happen in unserved and badly underserved areas. With few other existing cables already on the poles, the make-ready costs also tend to be low in such areas. So anyway, for what?
And I think that's probably a good portion of the CUD district. CV Fiber may be different because Barry and Montpelier are sitting right in the middle of the whole thing. But if they are working with Washington Electric, they're going to be able to do probably the largest portion of what is unserved in this county. I don't think well, they've got St. Johnsbury and Newport, but there's a whole lot of area in between for the Northeast Kingdom folks. And down south, they seem to be we got Bennington and Brattleboro, but other than that, I don't know if I'm sure Manchester has internet. And as do some of the more wealthy or affluent communities up in the kingdom. They have managed to get Peacham, Greensboro, Craftsbury, all have internet. I don't know if that's cherry picking. It's been a community effort, but they have it. Senator Pearson.
I think it's fair to say the distribution is profit driven. But that's not my question. My question has to do with the funding that you referenced, Madam Chair, of this ARPA money. And what do we have contours or guideposts for staff budgets? Because I'm kind of guessing that's not ARPA eligible. And
no, I was told they're funding E911 with ARPA funds. And the commissioner told me that the governor thought, and they're working with Guidehouse, that ARPA funds could be used to staff this broadband build out. They're not as restrictive as other funds, and they're using ARPA funds for 911 for the next 2 years. So
we can just take it out of the 100 million. Then,
yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
What a reasonable budget is, I have no idea. I'm going to look to our former auditor to tell us what a reasonable budget is. Senator, you're muted. There.
I can give you the answer with a 93.4% percentage of accuracy, which means that 93.4% of all statistics are made up by people on the spot. I think we can come up with budgets as to what we need, but just recognize that a significant amount of the staff input that we need is input on the front end to do things like the engineering and so on. And so in terms of, again, addressing some of the governor's concerns about not creating a massive bureaucracy that has to be fed out of general funds, many of the tasks associated with this ought to be able to be done within the period of time that we have ARPA funds available. And I think that should be the concept that we ought to be operating on. Some of these are going to go away. That said, that also lends to using contractual services as opposed to employed services for a lot of these functions, because it is very difficult to hire somebody for what essentially might be a 3-year job. In terms of the leadership, though, that's another question. Can you hire somebody of the right caliber who's buried down within an organization like the Public Service Department? And I think is a question that we ought to think very seriously about, and whether or not that person would also so positioned have the kind of independence necessary to be successful. This is the job, at least it's certainly the way I envision it, in which you really need a czar. You need someone who is sufficiently both energetic, knowledgeable, and empowered to move forward and to do so aggressively. And buried in the bowels of the Public Service Department, I don't think is a really good position to start from.
No, I'd be looking at whatever we do has got to have some degree of separation. I think that's why the water resources, no, whatever that board is, was suggested, because it's technically under the supervision, but it really is a quasi-independent board or, department. And the commissioner was open to that concept. It was her idea. So
What is the name of the board, Pearson? Just so I want to look it up so I see.
Clean Energy Development Board.
yeah,
Okay.
Clean Energy Development Fund.
And Perchlik, Senator Perchlik is the director, and I don't know, but there's an independent board that makes the decisions, but he also somehow reports to the commissioner.
Well, he's a classified state employee, isn't he, for that purpose,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. But his boss, quote unquote, is the board. So it maybe it isn't a bad model. And I don't know how he navigates that or if he has to.
If you'd want to come and talk to us about that on Zoom.
I'm slated to talk to him later tonight. I'm glad to ask him about
Ask him if you'd like to share
just the
Yeah.
concepts.
Right.
concept.
We
I mean,
also,
does it work? And is that a viable model for what we need to accomplish?
there's
So
also an
Debray,
odd feature of it is that the chair of Natural Resources and Energy appoints one of the board members. I think someone on the House side appoints one too. I think it's a very weird, it's the only thing I know like that. Every other year, somebody's term is up and I end up going shopping for, recommendations and someone else to join the board or stay on. That's working out. So it's there's also a legislative connection. And then there's the strange thing of how it got funded in the beginning, the VY funds. So
yes, that was Vermont Yankee, is when we hit them with taxes and fees.
yeah,
And the money dried up. Was it last year or the year before? The governor proposed spending all of it. And in the end, there wasn't very much money, and some went in, I think, in a recent budget, maybe even this one, but
I think
that fund got pretty low for a while.
right. I think the governor may have sent money that way through an ARPA recommendation. I'm not sure where I saw it, but I think that's where it was. And I believe it also has been receiving V-Light money. It sort of has an odd funding stream. And then it also is partly, they were loans. So there's a revolving loan fund component.
Okay, so we have a history of developing strange animals to do what we want. A camel will get you across the desert. That's a strange animal.
Well, in the corporate world, this is not an unusual situation to have essentially, whether it be an independent person or an independent department that is supported by, that receives its administrative support from another department or organization. And you have dotted line reporting relationships, one administrative and one direct. But I think ultimately, certainly in my mind, I would like to see what we're doing with broadband. This is so important. I think it reaches that point, at least for a limited period of time, where it needs focus and it needs direction and it needs, independent control. I don't want to see it buried in the bottom of another agency in which it, in effect, is part of the competition for funds and attention that a positioning within the Public Service Department as a direct report would provide. One of the things I know certainly that I envision when talking about the VTA was that this is a gubernatorial appointment, and as a result, the governor is really responsible for what it does or fails to do. And it's that fixing of responsibility that I think is particularly important here too. We want the CUDs to be responsible for what they agree to do and what they are charged with doing, but somebody needs to be responsible for this whole mess. Governors traditionally make this comment that, hey, we're going to get broadband out to the world, and governor after governor hasn't done it. Well, we've got a governor now who has the money to do it, and if that governor is responsible for the organization charged with doing it, that governor can be held accountable. Silence.
Well, yes and no. He hasn't come out like some other governors that they were going to be the connectivity state or whatever we were going to be.
But I would just say that's an argument to leave it in the department, to my mind. I mean, that's a direct, and Senator Bray and I talked about this with water funding. I mean, the buck stops somewhere, and ultimately it'd be nice if it stopped with the governor and flowed there, but it's tricky. I mean, you're the first to make the argument that that's not what you want. So I don't understand. That seems disconnected to me.
That's not what I want? You mean by
you just said it's the governor. We've got a governor with the money to do it, and and the resources to do it. And yet you don't want it in the department.
Well, because it winds up being diffused if it's in the department.
But we have money.
We have an intermediary in the middle, and you've almost organizationally hampered its ability to do what needs to be done.
What about if we did a deputy commissioner? I mean, we do that in different things. We have a deputy commissioner of mental health or whatever, right? Or commissioner. I mean, I don't know. I'm spitballing, but there is an accountability problem. That's why VTA went away, was because the governor didn't like its independence.
Right.
But we can't hold the governor accountable. Maybe the public can, but that also gets diffused. I think we want the ability.
And we don't want it reporting to the legislature.
Just me. You can report to the chair of finance.
That's right. You appoint the person and they report to you.
And they report to me. I like that solution, Senator Bray.
I agree. It's good to have Senator Pearson reminding me of the Clean Water Board thing. There were people who wanted a much bigger board with more non-administration members on it. And we stuck to making sure that initially it was only administration members, and now there's a minority of outside people. But it was if we're going to hold the executive accountable for executing, we have to have them in charge, and they're only in charge if they have a quorum of the committee. So that was where we landed. In this case, if whoever is ahead of this division effort program is appointed by the governor, I don't know how much higher profile and how much more attention could be brought to the position. And that would be the case if it were a deputy commissioner, for instance. It would be a gubernatorial appointee. So that's a pretty tight and very public connection. And given, how will all of us are, the ultimate report is on election day. So I suppose, to the extent that we want to see it happen. I can't think of, they're also in business all year round. We go home. There's a lot of advantages, I think, to it.
Okay. Senator Sarakin and then Senator Hardy.
So I haven't weighed in too much on this yet, but I think I'm leaning more towards where Senator Brock is. I like the attenuated sort of dots to the department. I think of the Green Mountain Care Board. I hesitate to mention that, but a smaller board like that with smaller amount of staffing. But I don't think whatever we do, I don't think we should shortchange them financially. I think we need to put the necessary resources and some degree of independence with this group of people, whether it's a 3-person board like the Green Mountain Care Board, or I'm not sure of the clean energy.
Don't use the Green Mountain. I think that's the bureaucracy. It's got everybody afraid.
Well, no, I'm not thinking anywhere near as big, but we need that kind of expertise, and we need, I think we need some fresh blood and some independence to make this thing go forward. And yet the appointment process, I guess, could be more similar to the Green Mountain Care Board. I don't know what it is for the Clean Energy Fund. I know we have a different appointment process, totally different, but still has the governor involved in the Public Service Board. But I do think there should be some connection to the department, but some independence from the department, and definitely the necessary funds to develop the expertise, not only to help the CUDs or wherever gets this money, but to be, a group of people that become the group that we look to for policy. And I think we need some freshness there. That's my 2 cents.
Okay. I think we've kicked this around probably as much as anyone has stamina to do. So I think, sharpen your pencils and think about it. We've still got the board and we've got the VTA. But I'm sensing we're getting some cohesiveness here about what we need. It's how it looks like, now we're into drawing organizational charts and what's going to be where. I think we can say for at least 2 or 3 years, we have money. And then, and I don't know, and maybe we should ask the CUDs what kind of money they're thinking of asking for in the next year, if they can tell us, because that would give us an idea. I mean, are they going to come in with grants? What's phase 1 going to cost CV fiber? What are they looking at to build out with Washington Electric? What kind of grant are they thinking of asking? What kind of planning grant? Just to give us an idea of how much demand is out there. We aren't going to have enough money to do everybody's plan all the way, but what are the CUDs thinking in terms of the minute we say, okay, apply for a grant, how much are they planning on asking for? Which would give us an idea of what the demand is. And then we might be shocked, we might be pleasantly surprised. Either way, I've got Senator Hardy and then Senator Bray.
It seems to me like the demand is going to way outstrip what we have. We have been given 100 million, right? Isn't that what we've been told for this first year? And so it's not like we can give out more than that in the first year. So I don't know.
But we don't know.
Want to go down that rabbit hole of what they're going to ask for in grants, but
well, no, what they're going to ask for over time is one thing, but what they've got ready to go this year, I think the Washington Electric and CV Fiber may be ready to go or close to it. I'm sure EC Fiber has some plans. I'm sure Northeast Kingdom has some plans. I'm not sure where everybody else is, and I'm not sure of how much any one of those entities is going to ask for. So as we look at setting up a budget and a budget for a governing authority of some form, I think it would be helpful as we think about that budget to know what's out there. Now, we are not going to be able to meet all the ask, but that's over time. I don't know if we can meet what's ready to be asked for this year. And then there's the, even if it's asked for, if they can get the personnel and basically the fiber, because that blew a few plans last year. You couldn't get staff and you couldn't get fiber.
So I just want to weigh in terms of the staffing issue. I told you all that I worked for an independent board that was tasked to do basically this exact same thing in Wisconsin in the late 90s. It was called the Teach Board, Technology for Educational Achievement Board.
Somebody must have a degree in putting those things together.
It was the silliest name. The legislature came up with it. Anyway, that it was an independent board and it was independently staffed. We had 5 staff members. We had the czar, who was a former legislator who got the job after she helped create it in the legislature. And then there was, so there you go, Anne, you could be the czar.
My retirement.
And and then there were 4 staff members. There was an administrative person. There was a curriculum person who had expertise in educational curriculum. There was a policy person, that was me. And there was a tech person who was a former telecom tech person who understood all the technical aspects of it, who had worked for some phone company or something. And that was 5 people. Now if we put it as a separate board, and obviously this was 25 years ago in a different state that's bigger than Vermont with different kinds of budgets, but if you really want it to succeed and you make it a separate entity, you really need to staff it with that kind of thought in mind to get this work done. If you put it within an already existing entity, you don't need the administrative person, because there's already this sort of, department around that person. And there's already a position in the public service department that is doing this part of this work. So, I think we need to give whatever entity at least 3 people, maybe 4, in order to get this work done quickly and at the caliber that we want it done. So just thinking about that in terms of the sort of scope that we're talking about for staffing this entity, and it's going to be more expensive and require more staff if you separate it out too much, rather than embed it in an existing department.
But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that as we perhaps think about putting this all together and having more staff available as a result of the combination, that has to bear with it the assumption that there are people there who aren't doing anything and who therefore have the free time to absorb something else. And I think that's a real question.
Yeah, and those are all questions we have to answer. Senator Bray.
I want to follow up on your money question, Senator Cummings, and that is, this seems like we're getting ready to start a marathon race, and we have money that feels like a sprint or something. So I'm just mindful of your question about what are plans for years 2 and 3 and beyond, because if we have this big surge of money in it, we launch a lot of things, but then they're unable to get far enough along to become self-sustaining, or we don't end up with other revenue streams to support their continued development in years 3 and beyond. That just seems, I would think we'd want to have a better idea about along those lines of what you're saying. We know how much it takes, not just to do year 1 or year 1 and 2, but for the long haul, because otherwise I feel like we start things that will then run out of gas.
And I think that's still an open question, is this board going to continue after ARPA? Because then it becomes an ongoing expense to the state. So the lower we can keep the expense, the better chance we have. This year, we've got $100 million and $50 million moved to next year. I believe the governor's budget did 80 and 80. It came to a total of 200 million over 2 or 3 years.
250, 55.
Okay.
What?
And then, but we're all just allocating money. I don't know that we have any, we've been told 300 million to do the state, but I don't know what that's based on.
Well, Madam Chair, we may get federal money yet again in
Yes.
infrastructure.
Very
The
likely
House
we
bill
will.
has a sunset, which I think is fine because we could undo it, but I wouldn't worry too much about, we're going to learn a lot in the next year or two on
Yeah.
whether or not we need to undo the board or whatever path we take. I'm not that fussy about deciding all that now.
No, I'm prepared to get us through this first year, to get all the CUDs up and running, to get the ones that are running, putting fiber out. We should know before we get back if there's going to be an infrastructure bill. And if there's money to put into broadband. But right now we've got a set amount. I think we know just from the CARES money that stuff's getting allocated. And I believe the legislative budget didn't allocate about half of what we've got, thinking they'll come back next year and do the next half once we get a better lay of the land and where the needs are. I got some revenue updates. And some of the corporate money looks like it's coming in pretty well. So there are some businesses that are making money. We'll have once we get through this year's tax filings in May, and, a year where hopefully the economy is opened up or opening up, we'll just have a better idea of what's happening out there. So my goal would be to get us through this year with a structure that can get us through always being able to fine tune the 3 to 4 years we have for ARPA funding, and leave us with a whole lot more poles, wire, and fiber than we've got now, and a human infrastructure that's able to keep running if and when more money comes in.
Right. The American Jobs Plan, so-called infrastructure bill, due out October, at least the White House's initial fact sheet on it explicitly lists high-speed broadband.
Yes, I have seen that. But everybody likes infrastructure. The problem is who pays and
Who performs it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Workforce.
So I think that one might not be such an easy sell, and probably can't be done by executive order. So it'll get fought out, just like this one's getting fought out. We got money. Okay, so thank you. It's been a lot of thinking, and it's been long days. I'm hoping next week. So far, we've got to get the bills we've got out. I don't think this thing is going to be ready for prime time in 2 days, but so be it. I'd say we'd meet on Monday, but I've got a doctor's appointment in Burlington, so I may be back mid-afternoon, but I'm not available, and I've canceled this one twice. I need to keep it. So we will see everyone. Thank you. This has been a very cooperative and peaceful discussion.
Good work today, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you, Senator. Everybody has played a part in that. So good. Thank you. We'll